Imagine knocking on the door of a small, empty residential house in Texas, only to discover it's officially listed as the headquarters for over 500 foreign tech workers.
I mean, that just sounds wild, right?
But it's real.
It is entirely real. On May 12th, 2026, ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons made an explosive announcement that just completely shook the corporate world.
Oh, absolutely. It was a massive sweep.
Right, federal agents raided work sites across multiple states. They were kicking in doors from Texas to New Jersey. They seized documents, locked down servers, and flagged a staggering 10,000 foreign students for suspected visa fraud.
And the craziest part of this whole enforcement operation,
Yeah.
all of those 10,000 flagged students linked back to just the top 25 employers operating inside a program known as OPT.
Just 25 employers?
Yeah.
That's incredible. ICE declared this an unprecedented crackdown on systemic fraud, and they deployed thousands of newly hired agents to dismantle what they describe as an illegal labor pipeline.
It completely rewrites the playbook on how the federal government handles worksite enforcement. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking you right into the center of this 2026 ICE crackdown on the student visa system.
We're going to look at the billions of dollars fueling this, supercharged enforcement machine.
Exactly. And the totally unexpected ways these actions transform the economy around you. We have a really solid stack of sources for this one. We're pulling from news reports of the raids, actual congressional testimony from the head of ICE, legal compliance guides, and a fascinating economic study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas.
But before we jump in, a quick note for you listening.
Yes, this is important. Because your sources contain highly politically charged rhetoric from the Trump administration, ICE officials, and critical lawmakers, we just want to be perfectly clear.
Right.
We are impartially reporting the facts and arguments in your sources. We are not endorsing any political viewpoint. Our only goal is to convey the ideas contained in the original material you provided.
Yeah, that's crucial. Our job today is just to help you understand the mechanics of what is happening under the hood of this massive operation.
So, to understand the larger economic shockwaves hitting businesses later on, we first need to understand the immediate catalyst. We need to look at how this fraud actually operates on the street level.
Right. And the primary target of this May crackdown is the Optional Practical Training Program, or OPT.
Okay.
On paper, it's a pretty straightforward system. It's designed to allow foreign nationals who are here on F1 student visas to work in the U.S. for a set period after they graduate.
So they get practical, real-world experience in their field of study.
Exactly. But Homeland Security investigations, or HSI, they uncovered this entire shadow industry manipulating that system.
Yeah, they identified a massive wave of what they call phantom employees,
Phantom employees.
which are basically foreign students who file all the correct government paperwork. They get their official employment authorization documents, but then they never actually show up to work a single day.
They exist purely as a paper trail, just to keep their visas active. And the businesses they supposedly work for, often just shell companies.
I was reading through the news reports in your sources, and the mechanics of this are just wild. ICE agents would show up to these shared, generic office parks, and they'd find supposedly competing separate tech companies that shared identical websites, identical physical addresses, and the exact same managers.
Wow.
Right. Or take that Texas employer we mentioned at the start of the deep dive. On paper, that company claimed they only had 3 OPT workers on staff.
But the records showed something else entirely.
Yeah, the government data showed over 500 foreign students using that exact same address to maintain their legal status.
It gets even more complex when you look at the money flow. Investigators uncovered these elaborate pay-to-stay schemes.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, usually an employer pays an employee, right? Here, the flow is totally reversed. The students illegally pay the phony employer's money under the table just to stay on the official payroll records.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
The student wants to stay in the country, so they funnel their own cash to a fake boss.
Yes, exactly.
And then the fake boss uses a chunk of that money to pay fake payroll taxes to the IRS, which makes the employment look perfectly legitimate to the government, and the fake boss just pockets the rest as a fee.
You hit the nail on the head. They're weaponizing the IRS's own tax reporting systems to create a false sense of legitimacy.
That's crazy.
And it gets worse. The HSI raids also found illegal offshore operations. The law strictly requires that the practical training happen inside the United States.
Okay, sure.
But agents found cases where students physically sitting in the U.S. were being managed, directed, and trained by employees operating out of call centers in India.
Oh, wow. So how does a federal program get this loose in the first place?
Yeah.
Based on your sources, it really comes down to the structural difference between the two tiers of the program, Standard OPT and the STEM OPT extension.
Right, the compliance rules are totally different.
Yeah, Standard OPT gives a graduate up to 12 months of work authorization. And the shocking thing is the burden is almost entirely on the student. The student simply reports their employment status to their university.
The employer doesn't even have to file a formal petition.
Exactly. But the STEM OPT extension changes the math. It gives science, technology, engineering, and math graduates an extra 24 months. But in exchange, it places heavily enforced burdens squarely on the corporation.
Okay, let's unpack this. So Standard OPT is basically like a college honor system hall pass.
Right. The student just promises they're doing the right thing.
But the STEM extension is like putting a GPS ankle monitor directly on the corporation.
That's a great way to put it. What's fascinating here is how federal investigators are using those specific STEM requirements as a trap.
How so?
Well, under STEM OPT, employers are legally forced to enroll in the federal E-Verify system. They're strictly banned from farming these students out to temporary agencies.
Oh, I see.
But the biggest vulnerability for the company is the Form I-983.
That's the mandatory training plan, right?
Yes. It's supposed to be a highly customized document detailing exactly what the student will do every day, the technical skills they'll learn, the specific names of their supervisors.
And let me guess, companies just treat it as paperwork.
Exactly. HR would just copy and paste generic job descriptions. But ICE is now using those exact forms as a massive legal liability.
So if an agent walks in and the job doesn't match the form...
Immediate legal trouble. If the student's daily coding tasks do not perfectly match the bullet points on that form, the company faces huge fines.
Wow. So ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons basically declared war on this vulnerability. In the sources, he refers to the OPT program as a magnet for fraud.
Yeah, he called it an uncontrolled guest worker pipeline.
He's clearly framing this as a major national security threat. He links these visa abusers to massive intellectual property theft and even organized scam networks targeting the elderly.
Which explains why the response has been so severe. But this brings up a huge logistical question.
What's that?
Well, if you're going to launch a coordinated, unannounced, nationwide crackdown across multiple states simultaneously, that requires a small army.
Oh, definitely.
You don't just process 10,000 flag students and raid dozens of office parks without massive resources. Where did ICE suddenly get the financial muscle to pull this off?
We actually find the exact answer to that in Todd Lyons' April 2026 congressional testimony.
Okay, what did he say?
He outlined the immediate impact of a recent massive piece of legislation called the Working Families Tax Cut Act. That specific act injected a historic $75 billion of new funding directly into ICE.
$75 billion.
$75 billion.
To put that in perspective for you listening, that is an astronomical budget increase for a single federal law enforcement agency.
It allowed them to fundamentally transform their operations basically overnight. Armed with that money, ICE hired 11,000 new officers and agents.
11,000. That's huge.
And they also brought on 1,800 new attorneys, specifically to chew through the massive legal backlog in the immigration courts.
And the statistics from his testimony really paint a picture of what that money bought in a very short time. Since early 2025, they arrested 457,000 aliens.
And the testimony specifically notes that 281,000 of those arrested had known criminal histories.
Right. They deported 565,000 people. HSI seized 2.5 million pounds of narcotics, including, massive amounts of fentanyl. They also recovered 145,000 unaccompanied alien children.
The enforcement tempo detailed in those reports is staggering. They're rapidly expanding their physical detention capacity across the country.
Yeah, aiming to actively sustain 41,500 detention beds at any given time.
But, buried inside all these massive aggressive enforcement numbers, there is one specific program that really caught my eye.
Which one?
It seems to completely contradict the rest of the operation. It's called the Incentivized Voluntary Departure Program, or IVD.
Okay.
Under this program, the government actually cuts a check. They pay eligible aliens a $2,600 stipend to just self-deport. Over 40,500 people have already taken this offer.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I need you to explain this. The government is aggressively cracking down, hiring an army of 11,000 new officers, conducting dramatic raids, but simultaneously handing people a $2,600 check to voluntarily walk away. Do they just hand them a stack of cash at the airport? How does paying people fit into a tough-on-crime strategy?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, The math actually makes perfect administrative sense.
Okay, how so?
The stated goal of the agency is maximizing deportations and clearing the system. When an agent arrests someone, putting them through the full U.S. immigration court system can take years due to backlogs.
Right, the courts are totally jammed.
Exactly. And it costs an absolute fortune in daily detention bed costs, government legal fees, court time, and administrative overhead.
I see. So spending $2,600 once is basically pocket change compared to feeding, housing, and guarding someone in a federal detention center for 3 years while they wait for a judge.
Exactly. The $75 billion funding allows them to run a multi-pronged strategy. You apply intense, aggressive interior enforcement, the raids, the audits, the sudden site visits, to put immense psychological and legal pressure on the system.
People really feel the heat.
Right. And right next to that pressure cooker, you open a financial release valve. You offer them a quick, incentivized way out to immediately clear out the legal backlogs.
Yeah.
It's a strategy built entirely around speed and volume.
Okay, so we have a clear picture of the government's strategy. We know the mechanics of what ICE is doing. We see the $75 billion funding them, and we see the volume of arrests.
Yeah.
But ICE does not operate in a vacuum. When this massive enforcement machine crashes into a fragile local manufacturing economy or an agricultural town, what actually happens?
This is where we bring in the economic study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And their findings are going to challenge almost everything you might assume about how immigration raids impact a local community.
The Dallas Fed study starts by breaking worksite enforcement down into two very different categories, right?
Yes. First, you have worker-targeted actions. These are the dramatic, unannounced physical raids where agents storm a facility and arrest unauthorized workers on the spot.
Okay, and the second?
Second, you have employer-targeted actions. These are the quiet, methodical audits of HR records, the massive financial fines, and the criminal charges brought directly against the business owners.
And the economists found that those quiet, employer-targeted audits are vastly more disruptive to the local labor market than the dramatic physical raids.
Which is pretty counterintuitive.
Totally. But the statistics the Dallas Fed uncovered create a total economic paradox. You would logically think that if ICE heavily audits a meatpacking plant or a massive construction firm and forces them to clear out all their undocumented workers, the total number of employees working in that industry would drop.
Right. Less available workers should mean lower overall employment.
You would certainly think so. But the Dallas Fed tracked the data and found the exact opposite.
Wait, really?
Yes. When a local industry gets targeted by severe ICE enforcement, overall employment in that sector actually rises by 0.4 to 0.5%.
That makes zero sense.
I know. Simultaneously, worker turnover absolutely skyrockets. People are constantly walking in the front door to be hired and leaving out the back door a week later.
Okay, but what about wages?
Here is the craziest part of the paradox. As total employment goes up, average industry wages actually decrease.
It really bends traditional supply and demand logic.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah, instead of a factory emptying out after an audit, it actually creates a chaotic hiring spike, but everyone ends up taking a pay cut.
Explain the mechanics of that to me.
It comes down to how terrified business owners adapt to sudden risk. Let's say you run a logistics company. You fire your undocumented workers to get your books clean before ICE shows up.
Right.
Now, you desperately need to replace them with legally documented workers, but the new legal hires you pull from the local labor pool likely do not have the same niche experience, stamina, or productivity as the unauthorized workers who had been mastering that specific grueling job for years.
Okay, so if the new guy is only 70% as fast as the guy you just fired, you have to hire more people just to keep your factory output at the exact same level.
Exactly. It's like panic buying during a shortage. You stockpile cheap, legal labor because you are terrified of falling behind.
And economists refer to that specific behavior as labor hoarding. Employers overhire to build a buffer.
But it's messier than just replacing 2 experienced workers with 3 new ones, right?
Much messier. Because these new legal workers are less experienced and often find the physical demands of the job overwhelming, they either quit out of frustration or get fired for poor performance very quickly.
And that constant churn explains why the turnover rate skyrockets.
Exactly.
Okay, the labor hoarding explains the employment spike and the turnover. But mechanically, why do wages drop? If you are suddenly forced to compete for a limited pool of legal documented workers, shouldn't you have to offer them more money to take these grueling jobs?
The Dallas Fed study isolates a few key mechanisms driving the wage drop. First, simple math. because you're panic hiring a large volume of entry-level, less experienced people. Their lower starting salaries pull the entire industry's average wage down.
That makes sense.
Second, the constant threat of enforcement completely destroys worker bargaining power across the board.
Because the undocumented workers who manage to keep their jobs are too terrified to ask for a raise. They just want to stay invisible.
Right. And those who do lose their jobs become desperate. They'll flood into other local businesses willing to take severe wage cuts just to survive.
Wow.
But the biggest factor lowering wages is the sheer cost of compliance. When the government ramps up audits, businesses have to hire immigration lawyers, overhaul their HR software, and pay massive federal fines.
They view it as a massive, unexpected tax.
Exactly. And corporations rarely just absorb a new tax. They pass those costs down.
So they freeze promotions, cut benefits, and lower starting wages.
Yes. The financial burden of the government's enforcement is literally transferred out of the employer's bank account and directly into the paychecks of the workers on the floor.
Which brings us to the final and maybe most surprising piece of the puzzle, the collateral consequences for legitimate, law-abiding businesses.
Right, because if an ICE audit craters local wages, sends your turnover through the roof, and forces you to hoard labor, how are legitimate businesses reacting to the constant anxiety of a federal knock on the door?
Well, they're relying on legal compliance guides. We reviewed a detailed advisory from Reddy Newman Brown PC, a prominent immigration law firm, and their message to their corporate clients is incredibly stark.
What are they telling them?
They're warning businesses that the bar for defensible compliance has been raised to an almost impossible standard. And they specifically warn about the danger of guilt by association.
Guilt by association?
Yeah. The guide points out that if your legitimate company simply rents office space in the same commercial park as a shady OPT employer, or if your company's name accidentally appears anywhere near a flagged record in SEVIS.
SEVIS being the federal government's digital student and exchange visitor information system used to track visas, right?
Right. If you get caught in that database's crosshairs, it can trigger a massive, unannounced federal site visit to your completely legal business.
Just for being in the same building.
Yep. Agents will walk into your lobby, demand to see your WABI, form I-983 training plans, pull your foreign student workers into separate rooms for interviews, and physically inspect their computer screens to ensure their daily tasks match the government paperwork down to the letter.
The disruption to daily business operations is immense, even if you are ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing.
So if you're a business owner trying to protect yourself from this nightmare, you would logically look for a government safe harbor.
Do those exist?
They do. The federal government offers digital systems called E-Verify and Image, designed to help employers confirm that their new hires are legally authorized to work.
Okay, that sounds helpful.
The Image program specifically is marketed as a protective shield. The pitch is, if you voluntarily sign up and follow their strict best practices, ICE promises not to hit you with devastating fines if a few unauthorized workers manage to slip through your screening with sophisticated fake IDs.
But the Dallas Fed study reveals a final, truly shocking finding regarding these programs.
What's that?
Despite the intense threat of raids, despite the $75 billion crackdown destroying competing businesses, employers are not signing up for E-Verify or Image in higher numbers.
Wait, really?
In fact, the researchers found that in some heavily targeted areas, the sign-up rates for these protective programs actually fell as the enforcement crackdowns increased.
Okay, I just have to stop you and push back on that. If the Image program officially acts as a shield against millions of dollars in IC fines, why on earth wouldn't every company sign up the minute Todd Lyons announced this crackdown? It seems like financial suicide to ignore it.
This raises an important question because it comes down to how businesses calculate risk versus government partnership.
Yeah.
Enrolling in the Image program is not just downloading an app or running a quick background check. The mechanics of the program require you to proactively invite federal ICE agents into your building to thoroughly inspect your hiring records and conduct a rigorous audit of your past books before you are approved for the shield.
Oh, wow. I did not realize the mechanism required an upfront audit.
It's like inviting the IRS to live in your guest room to prove you paid your taxes.
So to get protection from the federal agents cracking down on your industry, you have to voluntarily hand your private employment files over to those exact same agents.
Exactly. And businesses find that process incredibly invasive and costly in terms of legal review and HR hours. But more fundamentally, they are absolutely terrified of drawing the spotlight to themselves.
Even if they think they're doing everything legally.
Yes. because human error is inevitable in a large company. A transposed date on a form, a missing signature on an I-9, a manager who didn't properly log a training hour.
And under this new $75 billion zero tolerance policy, a missing signature could mean a massive fine.
So corporate lawyers run the math and calculate that the risk of voluntarily inviting a federal auditor into their building to find those human errors is actually worse than the risk of just keeping their heads down and hoping they don't get randomly rated.
That is wild. It proves that for many legitimate businesses, the sheer terror of federal government oversight is actually stronger than their fear of competing against the undocumented labor market.
They'd rather risk the catastrophic damage of an unannounced raid than voluntarily hand over their operational records.
It perfectly illustrates the tension at the heart of worksite enforcement. The government can build a $75 billion mechanically perfect compliance machine, but the local economy is ultimately driven by human behavior, panic, and risk calculation.
So complex.
So let's take a step back and recap this incredible journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the street-level mechanics of visa fraud. We explored how phantom employees, shell companies, and reversed pay-to-stay money flows were abusing the OPT system, treating student training visas as a backdoor labor pipeline.
Then we followed the money upward, detailing how a historic $75 billion funding injection from the Working Families Tax Cut Act unleashed ICE's nationwide crackdown.
Right.
We look at the logistics of deploying thousands of new agents and the cold administrative logic behind paying people $2,600 to self-deport to clear the court backlogs.
And finally, we uncovered the strange, counterintuitive economic reality happening in your local community. We broke down the mechanics of labor hoarding, showing how intense worksite audits actually drive total employment up, send turnover through the roof, and push average wages down.
All while terrifying legitimate businesses into actively hiding from the very federal programs designed to protect them.
It really highlights how every forceful government action creates an equally complex, entirely unexpected economic reaction in the local market.
It really does.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into your sources. We hope breaking down the mechanics of these programs helped you cut through the noise and see the actual gears turning underneath the headlines.
Excellent.
But before we go, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own, something that builds on everything we just discussed.
Yeah.
If aggressive, localized ICE audits cause average wages to drop and worker turnover to spike across an entire industry, who really pays the ultimate price for this enforcement? Could the financial burden of these crackdowns actually be falling just as heavily on the legal, native-born workers whose wages are dragged down in the chaos of labor hoarding?
That's a huge question to consider.
Next time you drive past a small, quiet house in a residential neighborhood, you might just wonder what kind of complex global economy is secretly running inside. Until next time.